They never talk about the silence that follows fame, the kind of silence that echoes even when the crowd is cheering your name. It's the sound of something missing, something the world's applause can't fill. That silence has broken more souls than failure ever could. And maybe that's why so many of them, the ones you see shining brightest, start searching for something deeper when the lights go out. Steve Harvey once said, "Fame will show you everything the world has to offer, and then it will ask you what you really want." And that's where this story begins, in the quiet shadows behind the flashing cameras. For years, celebrities had lived in a world where they were worshipped like gods. Money, luxury, fame, all of it came so fast, so endlessly, that they stopped asking where it was taking them. The parties got louder, the nights got longer, and the faces around them kept changing. But one by one, something began to shift. It started with a restlessness, an aching that no award could fix. You could see it in their eyes, the look of people who had seen the top of the mountain and found nothing there. Behind the smiles, there was loneliness. Behind the glamour, guilt. Behind every glittering photo, a moment of quiet panic. And then they started to disappear. Some went missing from social media. Others stopped performing, stopped attending shows, started traveling to strange places, far from the cities that had made them famous. Reporters called it a breakdown. Fans called it a phase. But in truth, it was a calling. A call that began softly like a whisper inside the heart and grew louder every day. A voice asking, "What is your purpose? Who do you thank when you have everything?" They started noticing things they had ignored their whole lives. The rhythm of dawn, the peace of prayer, the meaning in humility. And somewhere in that stillness, they began to hear the word Islam, and not as a religion forced upon them, not as a system of rules, but as a return, a coming home. Steve Harvey spoke about it once in a moment few noticed. He said, "I watched people who had everything, but when they found Islam, they finally smiled, not for the cameras, but for real. For some, it began with a conversation. For others, it was an encounter. A driver reciting verses on a long ride, a friend whispering Assalamu alaikum with a smile, a stranger praying on the floor of an airport at sunset." It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. But it changed everything. They began to read, to listen, to watch. And in every verse, in every prayer, they found something Hollywood never gave them, a peace. Imagine a world where every sound is crafted to make you feel alive, and yet you feel empty. Then imagine kneeling down for the first time, placing your forehead to the ground, whispering to something higher, and realizing that this is what you were made for. That's what they found. It wasn't about fame anymore. It wasn't about image. It was about surrender. The kind of surrender that doesn't weaken you, it frees you. But with that freedom came fear. The world they came from didn't understand. Publicists panicked. Brands pulled away. Friends questioned. They were warned, "You'll lose everything." But for the first time, they didn't care. Because what they gained was something no money could buy, a sense of truth. In the silence of the early morning, as the call to prayer echoed through the air, they realized something no fame had ever taught them, that the heart can only kneel before one thing, and when it does, it finally stops running. One by one, stories began to emerge. The rapper who walked away from the industry to find God, the actress who disappeared for a year and returned wearing hijab, the athlete who refused $1 million sponsorship because it conflicted with his faith. They weren't stories of loss. They were stories of awakening. Steve Harvey said once, "You can't find peace in a paycheck. You find peace when you find purpose." And maybe that's what Islam gave them. Not a religion, but a rhythm. A way of living that calmed the chaos fame had created. At first, the world mocked them. But as time passed, something strange happened. Others began to follow, quietly. Some without ever announcing it, because faith isn't always a declaration. Sometimes it's just a quiet change in the way you breathe. You see, Islam didn't take them away from the world. It showed them how to live in it without being owned by it. And when you look at their faces now, you see something you can't fake, serenity. The kind that only comes when a person stops searching for validation and starts searching for truth. Steve once said, "When you kneel down in prayer, the world can't touch you." Maybe that's why so many of them chose Islam, not to escape fame, but to escape emptiness. Because behind every stage, every screen, every spotlight, there was a soul asking for peace. And when they finally found it, they didn't shout about it. They simply smiled, the kind of smile that comes from knowing that after all the noise, all the pretending, all the running, they were finally home. The cameras had stopped flashing. The applause had faded. But something else had begun to echo, whispers, quiet at first, then louder. Rumors that carried through the corridors of fame like ghosts. They said something strange was happening among the stars, that those who once lived for the spotlight were turning their backs on it. Some called it rebellion, others called it madness. But those who truly watched, those who looked close enough into their eyes, saw something else. A haunting peace wrapped in mystery. They had changed. It wasn't just the way they spoke, softer now, slower, more deliberate. It was the way they looked at the world, as if seeing it for the first time. The same luxury that once defined them now felt heavy. Their mansions, their awards, their names etched in marble. All of it began to feel like relics of a life that no longer belonged to them. Steve Harvey said once in an interview, his voice quiet, "When you meet God, even for a second, everything you thought mattered stops breathing." That was the feeling, like everything else had stopped breathing. Some of them disappeared completely. Cameras would search for them in crowds, at events, on red carpets, but they were gone. Some sold their homes and moved far away. Others began to live in simplicity, so shocking that tabloids didn't know how to write about it. But not all of them could leave quietly. Some were trapped by contracts, by fame itself. One of them, a singer the world once worshipped, tried to hide her faith. She'd wear long sleeves on stage, whisper Bismillah before every song, pray quietly in her dressing room while the crowd screamed her name outside. But faith has a way of revealing itself, even when you try to hide it. When her label found out, they warned her, "This could ruin you. People won't understand." But she just smiled, the kind of calm, dangerous smile of someone who's already lost everything and found something greater. Her next performance wasn't like the others. The lights dimmed, the crowd roared, and as the first note echoed, she froze. For a moment, the silence felt eternal. Then she dropped the mic, whispered Alhamdulillah, and walked off stage. The audience thought it was part of the show. The world thought it was scandal. But those who understood knew it was freedom. That night became legend. Steve Harvey once told a story about a man he met in Dubai, a man who had once been a Hollywood producer. The man said, "I chased stars until I found the one who made them." That line haunted Steve. He talked about it later, saying that for years he'd wondered why so many people at the top of the world ended up on their knees. Because, he said, the higher you climb, the more you realize you're still looking up. And that was the truth none of them could ignore. It wasn't conversion. It wasn't rebellion. It was surrender. But surrender isn't easy in a world that feeds on ego. Some of them began to face a quiet war, not with the public, but with themselves. They fought to balance the life they'd built with the faith they'd found. One actor, famous for his violent roles, began spending his nights in mosques, his mornings giving charity in secret. His friends thought he'd gone mad. "You used to live like a king," they told him. He just laughed softly and said, "I was never a king. I was a prisoner with a crown." That line spread like wildfire. People didn't understand it, but they felt it. The transformation of these figures began to unsettle the industry. Studios started whispering. Agencies started monitoring. Why were so many of them walking away? Why were they finding this faith, this quiet, powerful thing that couldn't be bought, branded, or broken? It scared them because it meant control was slipping. And so the pushback began. Articles appeared overnight. So has lost touch with reality, a celebrity cult, a phase of spiritual confusion. But deep down, the truth was more terrifying than any headline. They weren't confused. They were awake. They had seen the machinery behind fame, the way it chewed people up and called it success. They had seen friends overdose, families shatter, dreams dissolve under the weight of greed. And when Islam entered their hearts, it was like someone had turned on the light in a room they never knew was dark. They began to speak differently, to carry themselves differently, to smile less for cameras and more for people, to pray in silence instead of perform on stage. Steve Harvey once said, "When you find truth, you stop performing for people and start living for God." But the world doesn't like that kind of truth. Some of them were blacklisted. Others were ridiculed. The same magazines that once praised their fashion now mocked their modesty. Interviews were cut, shows canceled, partnerships dissolved. And yet their peace remained. There was something eerie about it. The way they carried themselves through storms, untouched. Like they had found a shelter invisible to the world. People started noticing. Fans who once followed their fame began following their faith. Comments under their photos changed from admiration to awe. Your eyes look different. You look happier. You look free. And in that freedom, a new kind of revolution began, not one of rebellion, but of return. It spread quietly, through whispers, through prayers, through late-night reflections. Young people started asking questions. What did these stars find in Islam that the world couldn't give them? The answer was always the same: peace, not the kind sold in spas and retreats, the kind that fills your chest when you realize you're no longer running. Steve Harvey described it best. He said, peace ain't the absence of noise. It's when the noise stops owning you. One by one, more names joined the list. Some spoke openly. Others stayed silent. But their actions spoke louder than any announcement ever could. A model left her million-dollar contracts. A musician deleted his catalog. A comedian walked away from fame to study Quran. And behind each of them, there was a story, raw, painful, and holy. One actor, in particular, stood at the center of it all. Known for his power, his wealth, his arrogance, he had once laughed at religion. But life has a way of humbling even the proudest. When his closest friend died suddenly, something inside him broke. He said later that the silence after that funeral was the first time he ever heard his own heart speak. And what it said was terrifying. You've lived for everything but truth. He started seeking, reading. Until one night, in a quiet mosque far from home, he watched an old man pray. The man's forehead touched the ground. His voice trembled. His tears fell freely. Something inside the actor cracked. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the surrender. When he left that mosque, the night air felt different, softer, alive. He didn't tell anyone what had happened, not for months. But when he did, his words shook people. I didn't become Muslim, he said. I remembered I was always meant to be, and that changed everything. Suddenly, the narrative shifted. It wasn't just about celebrities converting. It was about souls remembering. They weren't abandoning success. They were redefining it. But not everyone wanted to understand. Some in power saw it as a threat. Because when people stop worshiping fame, fame loses its power. When people start worshiping truth, lies stop selling. And so quietly, some began to silence them. Their appearances were reduced, their interviews cut short, their words twisted. But it didn't matter. The movement was already beyond control. It wasn't a trend. It wasn't a wave. It was awakening. And the world could feel it, an invisible shift beneath the surface. Steve Harvey once said in a hushed tone, when light enters darkness, the darkness doesn't fight with noise. It trembles in silence. That's what was happening. The world that built itself on illusion was trembling because people were seeing through it. And at the heart of that trembling, Islam stood, steady, silent, serene. You could see it in the eyes of those who found it. A certain stillness, as if they had been chasing eternity and finally caught it. It wasn't about rejecting the world. It was about understanding it. The wealth, the fame, the chaos. All of it was temporary. What they'd found now was eternal. Some nights they would gather in small groups far from cameras. No scripts, no sponsors, no audience. Just hearts beating in unison, whispering subhanallah into the night. They weren't talking about their old lives anymore. They were talking about purpose, gratitude, forgiveness. And in those quiet gatherings, something remarkable happened. They began helping others find their way too, reaching out to the lost, the hopeless, the broken, because they had been there once. The same singer who once performed to millions now sang verses of faith in orphanages. The same actor who once glorified violence now funded shelters. The same model who once sold beauty now spoke about modesty and mercy. They weren't preaching. They were living proof. And when people asked Steve Harvey why this faith drew so many of the world's richest, he said something that silenced the crowd. Because when you've had everything and you still feel empty, that emptiness becomes your teacher. It leads you back to the one who made you. There's something haunting in that truth, that sometimes God hides himself in the emptiness so that you'll look for him there. And they did. Under the surface of fame, under the glittering lights, under the weight of luxury, They found the simplest, purest form of happiness, the kind that comes from knowing who you are and who you belong to. The story didn't end with them walking away from fame. It continued with them walking towards something far more powerful. They became symbols of something bigger, proof that no matter how far you drift, you're never too far to return. And perhaps that's what frightened the world most, that the people everyone admired had begun admiring something greater. One by one, they whispered the words that changed everything. La, 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 la. There is no God but God. It wasn't rebellion. It wasn't conversion. It was truth. The kind of truth that sets a soul free and terrifies a world built on chains. And as the sun rose over another city and another celebrity quietly bowed their head in prayer, Steve Harvey's voice echoed once more, soft, certain, eternal. Fame fades, looks fade. But peace, peace stays. And when you find peace in Islam, you don't chase the world anymore. The world chases you. The camera fades to black. But in that silence, you can still hear it. The whisper of hearts returning home.